I'm Scott Leadingham. Thanks for joining us here in the unique Northwest. And it is certainly a unique time. Once again, the holiday shopping season is upon us. And just in time for that, bars and restaurants closed down, retail capacity being restricted, and other businesses will not be open for several more weeks in Washington. And here to dissect some of what's going on in Central Washington is Yakima Herald-Republic business reporter Mai Hoang. Thanks for joining us today, Mai.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Mai, let's jump right into it. Of course, I don't think anyone is going to be happy about the recent closures, especially if you're a business owner who is greatly affected by all this. Let's break it down for some of the people that you talk to, the beats that you cover there. How are they going to adapt, especially some of these smaller businesses in the Yakima Valley?
So, I think the most, as you said, the most common thing is that businesses, especially restaurants, are feeling very worn down and frustrated that they have to go through all this again. I think for the most part, businesses have been trying to follow restrictions. Restaurants have been trying to limit the capacity, provide extra cleaning, all those, measures that they were supposed to do to reopen. So I think just to kind of jump into this, there's definitely the restaurants and bars that they've been very vocal that they're going to not close. They're going to keep their indoor areas open. Some of them are kind of going through their kind of whisper network. So they might peek into a Facebook group or do a little word of mouth that they're still open. Some of them are actually really vocal and just saying flat out, we're not closing. They feel like this is a ridiculous measure and that they're going to challenge it. So they're going to stay open. I think on the other end of things, there are businesses that are trying to put more of a brave face, kind of more of a positive, try not to get people down and feel sorry for them. And so they're trying to say, hey, we're going to try to make this work. And a lot of businesses are doing really creative things. One winery, Trevery Cellars, and near Wapato, they actually are doing bubble seating. So they have these bubbles on the lawn, and they have these fancy, things that they're, fancy service and couches and heaters. And, so a lot of people are trying to lean into the outdoor seating concept, kind of perking up their patio areas for winter dining. And then some of them are trying to, perk up their, takeout. So one restaurant, Crafted in downtown Yakima, they're doing a cookbook club. So they're kind of featuring different cookbooks they like, and then offering customers the option to buy those cookbooks as part of their takeout order. So I think, there's definitely businesses that are this is ridiculous, I'm not going to follow it. And then there are the businesses who are going to follow it and try to make it work.
Right. It's of course said that necessity is the mother of invention. So maybe you start a cookbook or whatever it is to help your own business. That makes sense. But let's back up a little bit. Of course, through much of the spring and summer, Yakima and the Tri-Cities region, a huge swath of Central Washington, Cheyenne and Douglas counties too, were sort of mired in phase one of reopening. It just seemed like they were never going to get out of it because of the case rates and a lot of the stuff going on with COVID in Central Washington. And finally, it got to phase two. There was slowly, it inched up. And a lot of the campaign public messaging was this mask up to open up, right? If everyone pitches in, we get up above 90% compliance with mask usage in public, we're going to be able to open up. And that happened, and the state allowed that. And it seemed like, hey, we've rounded the corner. I wonder if there's now a sense of people saying, hey, well, we did that. We made it happen, mask up to open up, and now we're right back to where we were in March and April. So is anyone kind of saying, what was the point of all that?
Yeah, I definitely feel that sentiment locally. There's a lot of frustration at, Governor Inslee and the state. I think they feel that they tried to cooperate, try to, collaborate, work together. And now they feel like they're kind of being set aside again, Governor Inslee is just kind of doing this thing and not holding much regard for businesses. One of the most vocal critics in Yakima has been Verlyn Best. She's the president of the Greater Yakima Chamber of Commerce. And she has been very vocal about how she feels like Governor Inslee is very much out of touch, doesn't know the struggles and challenges that small businesses offer. And I think for her, she got a lot of heat, during the mask up to open up campaign. A lot of people that were against mask mandates felt that, Berlin was trying to kind of, cater to Governor Inslee and, this government overreach. And so I think, the general sentiment now, especially among government and business officials, is that Governor Inslee is really committing government overreach. And, they're much more inclined to challenge these provisions. As in before, they tried to cooperate, try to, do the public messaging. And now, Yakima County commissioners have made it clear that they are going to work with local businesses to challenge these restrictions.
Another area that is, of course, very important to the Yakima Valley and Central Washington is agriculture and farming. And you cover that quite a bit. Earlier this year, there was also strikes and protests from farm workers and agricultural warehouse employees saying, we don't feel like we're being adequately protected. And the state sort of eventually stepped in and made some regulations. Now, a few of those agricultural operations have been fined by the Department of Labor and Industries for violations of those safety measures. Several people have died in various agricultural operations from COVID complications in the past 6-7 months. So I wonder if there's a sense at all from the agricultural employees and the groups that represent them that their voices might have been sort of lost in the last few months as the pandemic has worn on.
Yeah, I think, the focus from what I can see is that they're really focused on keeping their voices out there. This summer, there was a lot of farm worker advocates, did a lot of outreach to farm workers, and in turn did an enforcement blitz, which means they went to like LNI and they filed a ton of complaints, when, violations of social distancing or lack of hand washing stations, anything that they heard from farm workers. And I think it's pretty clear that it's likely that a lot of these violations that we've heard about really stem from those complaints, from those farm worker advocate groups. I think the protests and the strikes from earlier this year really energized farm workers. I think they realized that when they kind of mobilize and they speak out, that they can get stuff done. And so I think there's kind of a focus on like maintaining that organization, maintaining that, direct action and like beyond the pandemic, because I think there's a general acknowledgement that farmers and, fruit packing companies are trying to, provide masks and, kind of in general abide by the provisions. But I think there's kind of a general sentiment like, hey, there's definitely other issues that we face beyond COVID and that we can't just let up because, they've resolved COVID. So there's been a lot of different activities going on. It's a lot more behind the scenes, so it's not as visible as what we saw in May and June during the protests, but they're still happening. So Allen Brothers, which was one of the packing plants that had a strike, they're trying to unionize, for example. And I think the other thing we're seeing too is Familias Unidas, the union that really helped out a lot of these workers during these protests. They're the Burlington-based farm workers union. I think they're planning to be more active in Olympia. I think historically they've been very focused on like farm worker organization, which makes sense, they're a union. But now, they kind of was thrusted into the state attention, state limelight because of their suits against LNI and the Department of Health over farm worker safety regulations. And I think they realized like, hey, we can't, if we want to make a difference for farm workers, like we have to be at the table in Olympia. Like we can't just sit back and wait for policies to happen to farm workers. Like we have to have an active voice as they're making up those policies. And so I think it'll be really interesting. I know that one of the things I talked about with union officials is that they're really trying to figure out how do we, learn to play the Olympia game, how to navigate the politics of, lobbying for farm workers while not kind of losing, their kind of community organization spirit, losing the voice of the farm workers. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how they navigate that space.
They are learning new skills of lobbying, perhaps, and we're probably all learning some new skills this year during these pandemic times. Yeah. Yeah, good info and good to talk with you. Thanks for joining us today, Mai.
Thank you so much.
For more Central Washington coverage from the Yakima Herald-Republic, see their website at yakimaherald.com. And for more Northwest news, come to our website, nwpb.org. olympia.org. And now for some perspective about what is coming from and happening in Olympia is correspondent Austin Jenkins. Thanks for joining us, Austin.
Good to be here, Scott.
So, of course, this shutdown came right before the holiday season. And what is some of the speculation or the reasoning for health officials and the governor saying, in answer to the question, why this, why now?
Well, one thing I would say to start with is think about what a difference 6 weeks makes, because it wasn't that long ago, before the election, that the governor was announcing more opportunities for people to try to incrementally get back to a little bit of life as usual. So allowing theaters and bowling alleys to open up with limitations, larger gatherings at restaurants. And now all of that progress, we've suddenly gone into reverse. And for some businesses, it will be like we're back in March again in that stay-home order where all non-essential businesses had to close. Now, of course, that's not the policy now, but if you are a gym owner or a restaurant owner or a theater or bowling alley operator, you are having to significantly curtail and scale back what you were doing. And what the governor and what health officials are saying is that this is happening because we are seeing explosive, exponential growth in cases, from 1,000 new cases a week to 2,000 new cases. And now on track, if we don't turn this around, to 4,000 new cases per week. And they say that that is just a freight train running out of control that has to be stopped.
Well, frankly, there is some question as to how, not just what businesses were deemed to be necessary to close, but some of the capacity numbers, retail and grocery capacity now down to 25%. What have they said about the science behind that, why that number was chosen? I know that you've asked them about that. Where do those numbers come from?
Yeah, this has been puzzling and a little bit confusing. And again, it's not to necessarily argue with the 25% rule, but it's to, what I've been trying to do is better understand how they landed on that particular number. Because, for instance, compare that to Oregon, where it's 75%. Now, what the governor's office has said is that up until this latest set of rules, we were actually at a 30% capacity rule for retail and grocery stores. I don't know that many people knew that or realized that. I'm not even convinced that all retailers were adhering to that. Certainly, there was only one grocery store here where I am in the Olympia area that was regulating the front door, and that was Trader Joe's, and they've been doing it since the beginning. Now, what the governor's office said is that for the most part, stores could operate at 30%, and they didn't have to have someone counting bodies coming in and out at the front door. At 25%, for larger stores, that may not be a huge difference. For smaller stores, it could be a significant difference. I haven't seen this myself, but I've heard that some of the larger grocery stores here in the Olympia area do now have somebody at the front door. So again, why 25% and not 30% or 50%? We haven't really gotten an answer to that, but I think what we do know from the Secretary of Health is that what they're trying to do is they want people in masks in the store. They want people limiting their time, and they want to ensure that people are keeping some distance. And so that would be the reason why you would want to regulate the number of people inside the store at any given time.
No one wanted to go back to this, and especially not, I think, the governor, but here's where we are. And it seems that a lot of people will be put out of work or in need of some form of financial assistance again. What capacity is the state ready to do that? Is a special session of the legislature even likely at this point? I know some Republicans have been calling for it for some time. As we tape this, that has not been called for yet by the governor. And let's be frank, Congress probably isn't stepping in anytime soon with another financial relief package. Is anything going to happen at the state level?
Yeah, there's really two schools of thought here. Democrats, who are in the majority, for the most part, have felt that the governor can do this with consultation with the legislative branch and that a special session is not needed. The governor's office says it still has $200 million in unspent CARES Act money that can go toward relief for small businesses and workers who are affected by this latest round of closures. Republicans, on the other hand, have been saying for months that the legislature should have more of a role in this. And now, after this latest round of closures, are saying the legislature should be back to implement some sort of relief package, and the state shouldn't be waiting around for Congress.
Well, whatever happens, we know that you're going to keep us informed. Good information, and thanks for joining us today, Austin.
And thanks for having me, Scott.
You can see more of Austin's reporting at our website, nwpb.org. Thank you for joining us here in the unique Northwest.